At my daughter's wedding, I discovered I had been replaced long before I ever walked through the doors. I noticed it the moment I arrived. Not because anyone said it out loud, not because there was a scene. It was something smaller than that, something quieter, and somehow far more painful. I'm glad you're here. Follow my story until the end and let me know where you're watching from, because what happened that day changed the way I understood family forever. My name is Evelyn Carter. I was 68 years old when my daughter Madison got married. For months, I had looked forward to that day. I kept the invitation on my refrigerator. I counted down the weeks. Every time someone asked about the wedding, I smiled proudly and talked about my daughter's future. I had spent years imagining this moment. The photographs, the laughter, the chance to sit in the front row and watch the little girl I had raised begin a new chapter of her life. The ceremony was held at a beautiful estate outside Hartford, Connecticut. The grounds stretched across several acres of rolling green hills. White roses lined the pathways. Elegant tents stood near a sparkling pond. Everything looked perfect, the kind of wedding people save pictures of for years. I arrived early, wearing a navy blue dress I had purchased specifically for the occasion. My silver hair had been carefully styled. Around my neck hung a simple pearl necklace that had belonged to my late husband, Robert. As I stepped into the reception hall, I noticed a large display board showing the seating arrangements. Guests gathered around it, smiling and pointing toward their assigned tables. I moved closer, expecting to see my name near the front. Instead, I froze. My eyes searched the board once, then twice, then a third time. Evelyn Carter, table 18, near the back of the room. I told myself it was probably a mistake. Weddings were complicated. Details got mixed up. But then I noticed something else. There was no mention of mother of the bride beside my name. No special designation. No acknowledgement. Nothing. Just Evelyn Carter. Table 18. I stood there for several seconds, staring at those words while people brushed past me. Then I looked toward the front of the room. A beautifully decorated table had been reserved for immediate family. Madison's future in-laws sat there. The groom's parents sat there. Several relatives I barely recognized sat there. My seat remained at the back. A strange heaviness settled in my chest. Still, I smiled. I had spent too many years teaching myself how to smile through disappointment. As guests continued arriving, I picked up a wedding program from a nearby table. The cover featured a beautiful photograph of Madison and her fiancé. I opened it casually and began reading. Then my hands stopped moving. Under the section honoring the families, another woman was listed in a role that should have belonged to me. Victoria Reynolds, a wealthy family friend connected to the groom's side. Beneath her name appeared a sentence thanking her for being a guiding mother figure throughout Madison's journey. I read the line again, and again, my vision blurred for a moment. A guiding mother figure. I remembered late-night fevers, parent-teacher conferences, school lunches packed before sunrise. 2 jobs worked back-to-back to keep the lights on. I remembered every sacrifice, every promise, every mile driven, every dollar saved. Yet there, in elegant lettering, another woman occupied the place I thought could never be taken. Before I could process what I was feeling, I heard Madison's voice behind me. She looked radiant in her wedding gown. Beautiful, confident, happy. I wanted to hug her. I wanted to tell her how proud I was. Instead, I held up the program and asked softly, "Madison, is this correct?" She glanced at the page for less than a second. Then she smiled. Not warmly, not apologetically, simply matter of fact. This arrangement makes everyone more comfortable, Mom. And in that moment, standing in the middle of the most important day of her life, I realized I was no longer standing in my place at all. For a few seconds, neither of us said anything. Madison adjusted a loose strand of hair near her shoulder and glanced toward the ballroom entrance as if she had somewhere more important to be. Around us, guests laughed. Servers carried trays of sparkling water and champagne, and a string quartet played softly near the garden doors. The wedding continued exactly as planned. Only my world seemed to have shifted. I looked back down at the program in my hands. The paper felt heavier than it should have. More comfortable for who? I finally asked. Madison let out a small sigh. "Mom, please do not make this a thing today." "A thing?" I nodded slowly. "Of course." She smiled, relieved that I was not arguing. Then she kissed my cheek and disappeared into a crowd of bridesmaids. I stood there alone for another moment before folding the program and placing it carefully into my purse. Then I walked to table 18. It was located near the back corner of the reception hall, beside a service station where waitstaff organized dishes and linens. From my seat, the head table looked distant, small, almost like another event entirely. I sat down and folded my hands in my lap. Across from me sat distant relatives from the groom's side. Pleasant people, strangers mostly. They greeted me politely without realizing who I was. One woman asked whether I was a neighbor. I smiled and told her I was family. Even saying the word felt strange. As guests continued arriving, memories began surfacing one after another. I remembered Madison at 7 years old standing in our kitchen wearing a paper crown she had made at school. She told everyone she wanted to attend the best university in the country one day. Robert and I exchanged amused looks. She was a child with big dreams and endless confidence. That night, after she went to bed, Robert opened a savings account. For her future, he said. We did not have much money then. We lived in a modest 3-bedroom house. The roof leaked during heavy storms. The washing machine rattled loudly whenever it ran. But every month, we added something to that account. $20, $50, sometimes $100, whatever we could spare. After Robert passed away 6 years earlier, I continued contributing alone. Birthdays, holidays, tax refunds, overtime shifts from my consulting work. Everything went into the fund. Every deposit carried the same purpose. Opportunity, security, a future without unnecessary obstacles. I never considered it a sacrifice because she was my daughter. Looking around the ballroom, I realized how much had changed. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling. Floral arrangements stood taller than some of the guests. The wedding probably cost more than my first house. Yet the little girl who once hugged me after every school play seemed farther away than ever. My thoughts were interrupted when the wedding coordinator approached the microphone. Before the ceremony begins, she announced, we would like to recognize someone very special. The spotlight shifted toward the front row. Victoria Reynolds stood gracefully as guests applauded. Thank you for being such an important guiding presence in Madison's life. The applause grew louder. I joined in politely. No one noticed that my smile never reached my eyes. No one noticed that the seat beside me remained empty. And for the first time that day, a question quietly settled into my mind. If Madison was willing to replace me in front of hundreds of people, how long had she been replacing me when I was not looking? The ceremony began a few minutes later. Guests rose from their seats as soft music filled the estate gardens. I stood with everyone else and watched Madison appear at the end of the aisle. She looked beautiful. There was no denying that. For a brief moment, I allowed myself to forget everything that had happened inside the ballroom. I tried to focus on what mattered. My daughter was getting married. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of her life. Yet even as I stood there, something felt off. Small details kept catching my attention. Victoria Reynolds sat in the front row, directly across from the groom's parents. Several guests leaned toward her, speaking warmly as though she were an honored member of the family. More than once, I saw people congratulate her. One woman even said, "You must be so proud." Victoria smiled graciously and accepted the comment without correction. I waited for Madison to notice. I waited for her to say something. She never did. During the ceremony, my eyes drifted toward the wedding photographer. He seemed to know exactly where to position Victoria for every important moment. Family photographs, reactions during the vows, special candid shots. She appeared in all of them. I wondered how many planning meetings had happened without me. How many conversations? How many decisions? By the time the ceremony ended, a strange realization had settled over me. None of this looked accidental. It looked organized, deliberate. As guests moved toward the reception area, I found myself remembering other moments from the past few years. Moments that had felt insignificant at the time. Madison declining invitations to holiday dinners because she was too busy. Madison introducing me simply as Evelyn instead of Mom during professional events. Madison joking about growing up in a small-town environment whenever she spoke to wealthy friends from college. Each memory had seemed harmless on its own. Together, they formed a pattern I could no longer ignore. At the reception, servers carried trays of appetizers through the crowd. Laughter echoed beneath the chandeliers. The newlyweds moved from table to table greeting guests. When Madison finally reached mine, she remained only long enough to exchange polite smiles. Her attention quickly shifted toward another group. I watched her walk away and realized something that hurt more than the seating chart or the program ever could. She was not avoiding me because she was angry. She was not avoiding me because we had argued. She was avoiding me because she no longer viewed me as important. That thought stayed with me throughout dinner. Then came the speeches. The groom's father spoke first. His remarks were warm and sincere. Several people laughed. A few wiped away tears. Then the master of ceremonies introduced Victoria Reynolds. Applause filled the room before she even reached the microphone. Victoria spoke confidently about Madison's ambition, intelligence, and future. She described private conversations, career goals, and personal milestones. The crowd listened attentively. More than once, guests nodded in agreement. It sounded less like a family friend giving a toast, and more like a parent speaking about a daughter. When the speech ended, the room erupted into applause. I joined politely. Then I noticed something that made my stomach tighten. Madison crossed the room, wrapped her arms around Victoria, and whispered something into her ear. Victoria laughed. Madison smiled. And for the first time that day, I understood that the woman sitting in my place had not taken it. She had been given it. I remained at my table long after the applause faded. Around me, conversations flowed easily. Glasses clinked. Music drifted through the ballroom. Guests celebrated a future filled with promise. Yet my mind kept returning to the same question. When had this started? Not today. Not at the wedding. Something this carefully arranged did not happen overnight. It had been growing quietly for years. As I watched Madison move across the room greeting guests, I remembered the first time I noticed a change in her. She had just finished her second year of college. Robert was still alive then. We had driven 4 hours to visit her campus for family weekend. I remember standing outside one of the academic buildings while students and parents filled the walkways. Madison introduced us to several classmates. She spoke warmly to Robert. She joked with him. But when she introduced me, something felt different. "This is Evelyn," she said. "Not my mother. Not my mom. Just Evelyn." At the time, I convinced myself it was nothing. Young people often went through phases. I let it go. Then there was the charity gala 3 years later. Madison had invited me because she needed an additional seat filled at her table. I spent hours preparing. When I arrived, she thanked me for coming but spent most of the evening introducing me as a family friend. I noticed it. I simply chose not to address it. Looking back, I realized how often I had done that. How often I had explained away things that should have concerned me. The excuses came easily. She was busy. She was stressed. She was building a career. She was finding her place in the world. Those explanations protected her image in my mind. They also prevented me from seeing reality. A slow song began playing as guests moved toward the dance floor. The newlyweds shared their first dance while cameras flashed. Around them, I watched from a distance. Then another announcement followed. "Please welcome Victoria Reynolds for a special mother-daughter dance." For a moment, I thought I had misunderstood. The room erupted into applause once again. Victoria stepped onto the dance floor. Madison smiled at her with genuine affection. Together they moved beneath the soft lights while guests watched admiringly. My hands remained folded in my lap. I felt no anger, only clarity, a strange, painful clarity. The dance lasted less than 4 minutes, yet it seemed to answer every question I had been avoiding. This was not about one seating chart, not about one speech, not about one wedding program. Madison had spent years reshaping her story, and somewhere along the way, I no longer fit the version she wanted people to see. I thought about Robert then. He had always believed Madison would remember where she came from. "She has a good heart," he used to say. "Life might distract her sometimes, but she will never forget family." I wanted to believe that. Even now, part of me still did. But as the dance ended and guests stood applauding, another memory surfaced. A conversation from 6 months earlier. Madison had called to discuss wedding plans. The topic somehow shifted toward finances. She asked several detailed questions about investments, accounts, and long-term savings. At the time, I assumed she was simply becoming more responsible. Now those questions felt different, connected, purposeful. Across the ballroom, Madison laughed at something Victoria said. Then she glanced briefly in my direction. Our eyes met for less than a second before she looked away. And in that small moment, I realized something else. She was not worried about losing me. She was certain I would always remain exactly where she left me. Later that evening, the reception shifted into the comfortable rhythm that comes after formalities. Guests relaxed. Jackets came off. Conversations grew louder. The band played familiar songs while servers cleared dinner plates from the tables. I remained seated, quietly observing the room. Years ago, I would have been moving from table to table, checking on relatives, making introductions, ensuring everyone felt welcome. That had always been my role. Tonight, no one seemed to need me. Strangely, that realization no longer hurt as much as it had earlier. The shock was fading. In its place came something calmer, something clearer. I was sipping a glass of iced tea when I noticed Robert's younger brother, Benjamin, making his way across the ballroom. He had arrived late due to a delayed flight from Chicago. Benjamin had always been one of the few people who spoke plainly, even when the truth was uncomfortable. He greeted me warmly and immediately noticed my expression. "You look tired," he said quietly. "Long day." I smiled. That is one way to describe it. He studied the room for a moment. His eyes settled briefly on Victoria Reynolds near the dance floor. Then he looked back at me. "I have a feeling I missed something." "You missed quite a bit," I replied. Benjamin did not press further. Instead, he took the empty seat beside me and spent the next hour catching up on family news. For the first time that day, I felt genuinely at ease. Then, shortly after 10 o'clock, Benjamin excused himself to take a phone call outside. I remained where I was while guests continued celebrating around me. Nearly 20 minutes later, he returned. Something about his expression had changed. Not alarm, not anger, concern. He sat down slowly. "Evelyn," he said, "there is something you should know." I looked at him carefully. "What is it?" Benjamin hesitated. I was outside near the garden terrace. Madison was there with a group of friends. He paused again. I do not think they realized anyone could hear them. A cold silence settled between us. I waited. One of her friends asked why Victoria seemed more involved in the wedding menu. Benjamin lowered his voice. Madison laughed. My hands tightened slightly around the glass. "And she said Victoria understood the image they were trying to create." He stopped. "Then someone asked whether you were upset." I already knew I would not like the answer. "What did she say?" Benjamin looked genuinely uncomfortable. "She said, 'My mother's money matters.' My mother herself does not. She will get over it. She always does." For several seconds, the sounds of the ballroom seemed distant. The music, the laughter, the conversations, everything blurred into a dull background hum. Not because the words surprised me. Deep down, I think part of me had already begun to understand the truth. What stunned me was how casually they had been spoken, as if my role in her life could be reduced to a financial category, as if decades of sacrifice could be summarized on a balance sheet. Benjamin placed a hand gently on the table. "I am sorry." I nodded once. Then I looked across the room toward Madison. She was smiling for photographs, surrounded by friends, radiant, confident, certain. And in that moment, something inside me became very still. Not broken, not angry, simply still. Because for the first time all day, I stopped wondering whether I had misunderstood the situation. I stopped searching for explanations. I stopped making excuses on her behalf. The truth had finally arrived, and it had arrived in her own words. The reception ended shortly before midnight. Guests gathered their coats, exchanged final hugs, and slowly disappeared into the cool Connecticut night. I congratulated the newlyweds, smiled for the last photograph they requested, and thanked the event staff on my way out. No one looking at me would have guessed what I was thinking. No one would have guessed that the most important conversation of the day had happened without me saying a single word. The drive home took a little over an hour. The roads were quiet. Streetlights reflected across the windshield as I made my way back to the house Robert and I had shared for more than 30 years. I expected to feel devastated. Instead, I felt unusually calm. Not happy, not relieved, simply calm. There comes a point when the truth becomes too clear to argue with. That night, I reached that point. When I pulled into the driveway, the porch light was still glowing. I had left it on that morning before heading to the wedding. For a moment, I sat in the car and looked at the house. So many memories lived inside those walls. Birthday parties, holiday dinners, school projects spread across the kitchen table, family, photographs lined the hallway. Madison's entire childhood seemed woven into every room. Yet for the first time, I wondered whether she remembered any of it the way I did. Inside, I changed out of my dress, made a cup of tea, and carried it into Robert's old study. The room had remained almost unchanged since his passing. His books still filled the shelves. His reading chair remained beside the window. On the desk sat several folders containing financial records, investment documents, and family estate plans. For years, I had managed them carefully. Every account had a purpose. Every decision had been made with family in mind. I opened the bottom drawer and removed a thick blue folder. Across the front, in Robert's handwriting, were 3 simple words: Madison Education Fund. I stared at the folder for several seconds before opening it. Inside were decades of planning, statements, contributions, letters, notes. The account had started as a small savings fund when Madison was 7 years old. Over time, it grew through disciplined investing and careful management. After Robert passed away, I continued adding to it whenever possible. By now, the balance had reached a little over $100,000. Enough to help fund advanced graduate studies if she ever chose that path. Enough to create opportunities most families could only dream about. I slowly turned each page. The numbers did not upset me. What affected me were the memories attached to them. Every deposit represented something sacrificed. Vacations postponed, purchases delayed, extra consulting projects accepted during weekends. Not because anyone forced me to do it, because I loved my daughter. Then I remembered Benjamin's words from the reception. My mother's money matters. My mother herself does not. The sentence echoed through the quiet room. For years, I had assumed the fund represented security. That night, I began to wonder whether it had become something else entirely. An expectation, a guarantee, a reward disconnected from gratitude or respect. Shortly after 1 o'clock in the morning, I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts. I stopped at one name: Charles Whitmore. Family, attorney, trusted advisor, friend of Robert's for nearly 20 years. My thumb hovered over the screen for a moment before pressing call. The line rang twice. Then Charles answered. His voice sounded sleepy but alert. "Evelyn, is everything all right?" I looked down at the blue folder resting on the desk. "Charles," I said quietly, "tomorrow morning, I need to review every document connected to Madison's fund." Silence followed. Then he answered carefully, "I understand." And for the first time that day, I stopped protecting my daughter from the consequences of her own choices. The next morning, I arrived at Charles Whitmore's office at 9 o'clock sharp. The building overlooked the Hartford skyline, and I had visited it many times over the years. Usually those visits involved routine updates, tax planning, or estate reviews. This meeting felt different. Charles greeted me warmly and led me into a private conference room. A thick stack of documents already waited on the table. He studied my face carefully before speaking. "Benjamin called me after the wedding," he said. He was concerned. I nodded. He was right to be. Charles did not ask unnecessary questions. That was one reason Robert trusted him for so many years. Instead, he opened the blue folder and reviewed the details. The education fund had been established entirely under my control. Every contribution, every investment decision, every beneficiary designation remained subject to my approval. Legally, nothing prevented changes. "Before we discuss options," Charles said, "I want to ask something important. Are you making decisions based on emotion today, or based on clarity?" It was a fair question. I considered it carefully. "Yesterday was emotional," I replied. "Today is clarity." Charles nodded slowly. Then we spent the next 2 hours reviewing every page. By noon, I understood something I had never fully considered before. The fund was never an obligation. It was a gift, a voluntary act of love. Somewhere along the way, I had allowed myself to think of it as a debt I owed. But I did not owe anyone a reward for treating me as disposable. Meanwhile, life continued as if nothing had changed. Madison and her new husband left for a luxury honeymoon in Italy. Social media filled with photographs from Lake Como, Florence, and the Amalfi Coast. Smiling selfies, sunset dinners, elegant hotels. Friends and relatives filled the comment sections with congratulations. Looking at those images, no one would have guessed what had happened at the wedding. And Madison certainly showed no signs of concern. 3 days after the ceremony, she called me. Her voice sounded cheerful, relaxed. "Mom, guess what?" she said. "We got upgraded to a suite." I listened politely while she described ocean views and rooftop dining. Not once did she mention the wedding program. Not once did she mention Victoria. Not once did she ask whether I had been hurt. Eventually, the conversation shifted toward her future plans. "I have been thinking seriously about graduate school," she said. "An Ivy League program would really help my career trajectory." The statement landed differently than it would have a week earlier. I simply listened. Madison continued outlining business school options, networking opportunities, and expected tuition costs. She spoke confidently because she believed those resources already existed. In her mind, the path ahead was secure, guaranteed, paid for. When the call ended, I set my phone down and stared out the kitchen window. The garden Robert loved was beginning to bloom again. Spring sunlight touched the flower beds he once maintained himself. For the first time in years, I felt no pressure to rescue someone from the consequences of their own choices. Over the following week, Charles prepared a series of documents. Every step was handled carefully and legally. Every detail was reviewed multiple times. I signed papers, updated instructions, revised beneficiary designations. Throughout the entire process, Madison remained completely unaware. She continued discussing future educational plans during occasional phone calls. She continued speaking as though the fund belonged to her already. What struck me most was not entitlement. It was certainty, absolute certainty that I would continue accepting whatever role she assigned me. The wedding had revealed how she saw me. The following weeks revealed something equally important. She never imagined I could see myself differently. Nearly 6 weeks passed before the final paperwork was completed. Charles called on a Tuesday afternoon to confirm that every document had been reviewed, signed, and officially recorded. Nothing had been rushed. Nothing had been done impulsively. Every decision reflected careful thought. When I hung up the phone, I felt something unexpected. Peace. Not satisfaction. Not triumph. Peace. For years, I had carried responsibilities that no longer belonged to me. Now, for the first time, I had set them down. Madison returned from Europe energized and optimistic about the future. During our conversations, she frequently mentioned graduate programs, admissions deadlines, and networking opportunities. She talked about prestigious campuses, executive leadership tracks, and long-term career goals. I listened politely. I asked questions. I encouraged her to work hard. What I did not do was discuss the changes that had already been finalized. That conversation would come soon enough. One afternoon in early June, a certified envelope arrived at Madison's apartment. Charles had coordinated everything according to legal procedure. The package contained formal documentation regarding the restructuring of the educational fund and its future purpose. I happened to be watering flowers in my backyard when my phone rang. The caller identification displayed Madison's name. I already knew why she was calling. The moment I answered, I could hear confusion in her voice. "Mom, I just received something from Charles." I remained calm. "I expected you would." A brief silence followed. "There has to be some mistake." I set the watering can down beside the garden path. "What part seems mistaken?" Her voice tightened. "The fund, the beneficiary designation, the scholarship program. I do not understand any of this." The documents explained everything clearly. The educational account had been redirected into a scholarship initiative honoring Robert Carter's legacy. The program would support young women from working and middle-class families who demonstrated academic promise but lacked financial resources. Every dollar would be used for educational advancement. Every dollar would continue serving the purpose Robert and I had always valued. "Opportunity. You changed it?" Madison asked quietly. "Yes." Another silence. Longer this time. Without telling me, I looked across the yard at the rose bushes Robert planted years earlier. "The account belonged to me, Madison." Her breathing became audible through the phone. "I built my plans around that money." The statement lingered between us. Not because it was cruel, because it was honest. For perhaps the first time in our entire relationship, she was speaking openly about what she expected from me. "I know," I said. "That is part of the reason I made the change." Her voice rose slightly. "You are punishing me." "No," I replied. "I am redirecting a gift." More silence followed. Then came the question I had anticipated for weeks. "Is this about the wedding?" I could have listed every detail. The seating chart, the program, the speeches, the dance, Benjamin's conversation. Instead, I answered with complete honesty. The wedding did not create the problem. She said nothing. The wedding revealed it. For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then I heard something unfamiliar in her voice. Not anger, not confidence, uncertainty. The certainty she had carried for years was finally beginning to crack. And as our conversation ended, I realized that losing the money was not what shocked her most. What truly surprised her was discovering that I no longer saw myself through the role she had assigned to me. The weeks that followed were quieter than I expected. Madison did not call for several days after our conversation. Then several days became 2 weeks. For most of my life, that kind of silence would have worried me. I would have wondered whether she was upset. I would have looked for ways to repair things. This time, I allowed the silence to exist. Not because I stopped loving my daughter, because I finally understood that love and accountability could exist together. Summer arrived in Connecticut. The garden flourished. The roses Robert planted years earlier bloomed brighter than they had in seasons. Life moved forward one ordinary day at a time. Then, near the end of July, Madison called again. Her voice sounded different. Softer, less certain. "Can we meet?" she asked. We agreed to have lunch at a small restaurant halfway between our homes. It was a simple place with outdoor seating and large maple trees providing shade from the afternoon sun. When I arrived, Madison was already there. She looked tired, not physically, emotionally. For a moment, I saw traces of the little girl she used to be. We ordered lunch and exchanged polite conversation. The weather, work, family news. Neither of us mentioned the real subject immediately. Eventually, Madison placed her fork down and looked at me. "I have been thinking a lot," she said. I waited quietly. About the wedding. About everything. She stared at the table for several seconds before continuing. "I think I convinced myself that success required distance from where I came from." The honesty surprised me. "Why?" I asked gently. She sighed. "Because I was afraid people would judge me. I spent years trying to fit into rooms where everyone seemed wealthier, more connected, more impressive." Her eyes lifted toward mine. And somewhere along the way, I started treating the people who loved me like they were obstacles instead of blessings. The words hung between us. There was no dramatic apology, no tears, no grand speech, just uncomfortable truth. Sometimes truth is enough. "The fund was never the real issue," I said. Madison nodded slowly. "I know that now." We sat quietly for a moment. Then she asked the question I suspected had been weighing on her for weeks. "Do you think you can ever forgive me?" I thought carefully before answering. "Forgiveness is not the difficult part." She looked confused. "What is?" "Trust," I replied. "Trust takes longer." Madison nodded. This time, she did not argue. She did not defend herself. She simply accepted the answer. Several months later, the first Robert Carter Scholarship recipients were announced. 3 young women received awards to help pursue higher education. I attended the ceremony with Benjamin and several community leaders. As each recipient shared her story, I found myself smiling. One student wanted to become an engineer. Another hoped to attend medical school. The third planned to study education and return to teach in underserved communities. Listening to them speak, I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Certainty. Not certainty about other people. Certainty about myself. The fund had not disappeared. It had fulfilled its purpose in a different way. Opportunity still existed. Hope still existed. Only entitlement had been removed from the equation. As for Madison, our relationship did not magically return to what it once was. Real life rarely works that way. But little by little, something new began taking shape. Not based on assumptions. Not based on obligation. Based on honesty. And when I think back to that wedding now, I no longer remember the seating chart or the speeches first. I remember the lesson. Sometimes the greatest thing you recover after betrayal is not money, status, or recognition. It is your own sense of worth. The moment I stopped accepting the role someone else assigned to me was the moment I finally reclaimed my place in my own life.